Today we're going to be replacing the rubber boot on the intermediate steering shaft on a 1970 Chevy Chevelle. Here's the intermediate steering shaft that goes from the steering column to the rag joint. I already disconnected it off the rag joint because I'm going to pull it off. So this is the rubber boot that we're replacing today. It's dry rotted, it's torn, it's worn for so many years, and it's probably never been replaced. And this knuckle right here, the black thing right there, is where actually it's filled with grease, and it allows the shaft to go in and out. So it functions as a universal joint, really. And so I definitely want to make sure that there's no water and debris getting in and that there's no grease coming out. So that's what we're going to replace. And you want to make sure that you don't overlook this part, because anything that deals with steering and braking, you want to make sure that it's functioning properly, because that's the #1 priority, is safety. And the other thing too is the ground that connects the horn to the frame, to the car, is right here through this rag joint. So this is very, very important, and you want to make sure you do it right. So my brake booster and the master cylinder were already off, and that's why I figured I'd do this before I put those on. Now, I don't think that you'd have to remove them in order to access it. It does make it easier, especially since I'm filming, but that would be totally up to you if you feel like it needs to do it, but obviously here it makes it so much easier. So this is the shaft that I just took out of the car. So it's complete, ready to go. And here's another one that I had laying around, and you'll see why I have this one in a little bit, because I'm going to show you how I actually had to take this pin out, because that one is what caused me problems. But as you can see here, here's the clamp and the bolt that connects everything to the steering column, and that's what tightens down. The thing I like about the steering shaft and the way they designed it was that it only goes on one way. So the steering column actually has a shaft, a notch rather, that it allows the bolt to pass through, and if it's not centered properly, it's not going to let the bolt pass through, so that only goes one way. And same thing with here at the rag joint, same idea. You have the notches and the bolt holes, which only go one way. So it's pretty easy to put together. And you have the knuckle here that is held in place, and then the spring clamp that holds the rubber boot in place, and then inside you have several pieces that come together, and all the grease, and this is what the inside of the knuckle looks like without the spring clamp. Then the rubber boot is actually held on by this other spring clamp, goes over here, and so you have several pieces, not too hard, not too complicated. I've seen some people actually take the steering shaft and disconnect it from right here to where you have this part of the shaft and this part of the shaft separately. I'm not actually going to do that today, and typically what I've noticed is that people avoid that and typically don't do that. But I mean, it's you know, your call, your car, your call, and so depending on what you find easier, then go ahead, go for it. But I'm not going to do that today, nor do I recommend that. So there's the grease, axle grease, that is just filled in the knuckle. As you can tell, if I zoom in, you just see it's dry rotted. It's time to go. Here's the new one. I cleaned off the grease so you can see it a lot better. But pretty much 3 pieces that go on here. You have these 2 pegs and this little like holder clamp type thing that kind of holds it all together. And it all comes together pretty easily. And then you have a spring clamp over the rubber boot. And you can see here, this is actually the steering shaft that I'm going to be using right here. As you can see, there's the marks from where I was hitting it, and you'll see what I had to go through to get it. So I'm going to be using this clamp off of the original, and then also the spring clamp. Since I'm missing one, I have no choice but to use this one. And then the better one out of the 2, this one's already kind of crooked. I could bend it, but I might as well just use this one. Now, this peg right here that goes across, and I'm actually going to take this off so you can see it. This peg right here is what what caused me some problems. And it wasn't too hard once you know the proper way to do it. But I tried hammering it out. I tried putting it through the bench vise, and I'd get some progress. But you'll see what I had to do. I'm going to show you. I had to actually take it to a buddy shop of mine, and with a bottle jack press, I had to press this out. So I'm going to show you that in a little bit. So I had to remove the cross pin from the steering shaft before I could access the spring clamp and fit the new rubber boot onto the shaft. The first thing I tried to remove the pin was to put the shaft into a bench vise, and the idea was if I can compress the bench vise through something hollow, the pin would push through. Right away I wasn't seeing any positive results on that, and mostly because I didn't want to damage the pin. I didn't want to mushroom the head on it, and so I quickly just decided to hammer it through. So a second method that I tried was using a hammer to beat the pin through. Now this is very risky because you can damage the pin and you can mushroom the head. And when it comes time to assemble it, if it is damaged, you're going to have problems fitting it through. And so I recommend you being very, very careful. Use a punch like I did. I've heard of some people using a hollow punch just so you can get more surface area. But a center punch will work just fine, and that's what I used. Now, I was only able to get the pin out part of the way using this method. And the reason for that was I was noticing that I was damaging the shaft from the repeated blows, and where it was making contact on the bench vise, it was starting to damage the shaft. Now, the final method that I used to completely remove the pin from the shaft was to use a bottle jack press that my buddy had at his shop. Now, I don't recommend you going out and buying a press just for this one job, but if you have access to one, I definitely recommend using it just because it's faster, it's cleaner, it's safer, it's more efficient, and there's less risk to damage the pin or to damage the shaft. Using the bottle jack press, I was able to remove the pin, but also I was able to install it without any problems. I was able to put it exactly how it was before, positioning it in the original position, but also doing it in a safe manner and without risking much damage to the pin or the shaft. So here's what the rubber boot looks like and the shaft looks like when it's finally inside the knuckle completely. I haven't put the spring clamp in. This is what the spring clamp looks like. Now this has some notches. That's where these things will go into on the knuckle. And I'm going to put those in a little bit. But you definitely want to make sure that the boot is all the way in and snug, because this thing will be moving in and out and there will be vibration. So you definitely don't want it stretching, because that'll cause it to fail. It'll cause it to rip. And so when you position it, make sure it's snug, make sure it's all the way in. So this is what the rubber boot looks like when it's finally completely installed. Now I will say, word of advice for the spring clamp is be very, very careful. Just be patient when you're positioning it. Whether you're using a screwdriver or needle nose pliers, you want to be very, very careful, because it is metal to rubber and it's very easy to puncture it. And the last thing you want to do is go through all this work and have a punctured rubber boot before you're about to finish installing it. Now, before you install the steering shaft into the car, you want to make sure that the ground point near the rag joint is clean and it's going to have a nice grounding point, because this is where you're going to be grounding out the car to the horn. And it makes no sense to put it back in, to go through all this work, and then it's still not function properly. So you might as well clean that out, because the ground point's going to be there on the rag joint. And then the only other thing too is the finish that I had on these, both of them, was just a steel finish. There was no coating on them, there's no paint. And so I painted the shaft black. I might paint the knuckle black or silver, I'm not sure yet. But from what I understand from the factory, they were originally just steel and there was no coating. So those of you that want to preserve the originality, it might be smart to just do a clear coat That way you can at least have something protecting it. I'm going to be spray painting it just to, you know, give it some protection, and just to make it look nicer too. So I finally got the car in the garage instead of it sitting outside for so long with the car cover. But I'm going to organize my garage and catalog some of the parts, and just to give some space around it so I can easily work without a problem. If you like this video, hit like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.